Hey, welcome to Suprematism and Constructivism, the first part of three. Now, as you know, the last time we left off, we were in Paris and with Art Deco, and before that were in Surrealism, and after this we're going to be in the Bauhaus in Germany, but right now we are headed from Paris to Russia. We do have our passports and papers already, so let's carry on. As you remember, we briefly showed these slides, these posters that had to do with recruitment during World War I at a time when Russia was fighting with France, the UK, and its colonies, and later on the United States joined up, and they were the Axis, the Allied powers, sorry, jumping ahead, the Allied powers. And this is World War I. We have 1914 to 1918, and they're fighting against the Central Powers, Austro-Hungarian, German, Ottoman empires, and later Italy. And so what we see over here is actually after Russia exited the war. They were having problems of their own. And the poster that you see there is actually a poster to accelerate recruitment into the Red Army. This is, have you enrolled as a volunteer? And so it's questioning, it's looking for engagement, and it's making you ashamed if you don't. And it's pretty much got more in common with the Italian and Germans in its presentation than it does in the more iconic UK and United States. Something to keep in mind about Russia, even though they withdrew early, they had the most military deaths during World War I, 30% of them in France with 25, and the US clocked in at 2%. But Russia withdrew from the war after the Russian Revolution came along, 1917. Now, this is what we're going to get into from here, how the Russian Revolution started and why. And give you a little overview. There was Tsar Nicholas II, who in 1918 was overthrown and executed, and the situation was, for quite a while, Russia was ravaged by this civil war, which is the main reason, the principal reason why Russia had to withdraw from the World War, needed to take care of business themselves. And so the Red Army of Bolsheviks, they managed to finally emerge victorious in 1920. And here you see Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the Bolsheviks. And now let's take a closer look at the process that happened. Okay, and we touched on this briefly in the first class. Just a reminder that this poster that you're looking at here, the text on that says forward, and that was enough for the anti-Obama folks the first time he was running for president to call him a socialist. And nowadays, calling someone a socialist is pretty mild if they're running for president, especially after 4 years of a president who really enjoys behaving like a schoolyard bully with his names. But we will just get on with that and basically talk about spoilers, okay? To talk about the movement that began in the 1920s in Russia. It ended in 1934 when Joseph Stalin, the premier of the Soviet Union, not only engaged in bloody purges, but also proclaimed the end of experimental art, which is what we're going to be talking about. So there's the spoiler. And he decided that socialist realism was to be the official style of Russia. Now, just to take a look at pre-revolutionary Russia, to give you an idea what the graphics looked like before this revolutionary art movement that came out of the revolution. We'll take a look at, here's a banknote, 25 rubles from 1912, with a portrait of the Emperor Tsar Alexander III, who was back in the 1800s. So this is what their money looked like. You can see the ornateness, you can see the kind of folk artsiness of it. And this is actually a poster for a tobacco factory in St. Petersburg. And The idea is you just smoke this cigarette and you'll be whisked away to all sorts of heroic battles on land and sea. And the image above actually depicts the Russo-Japanese War, which was fought during 1904 and 1905. So anyway, there's one way to get high. And here's a theater program cover for the Imperial Royal Bolshoi Theater that 1912, actually 2 years before the start of World War I. Okay, and here you can see some more contemporary looking graphics. This is an exhibition poster of 36 artists, and their names are on them. And what was happening was, bit by bit, the world was intruding on Russia in terms of aesthetics. And although this is still, somewhat traditional Russian graphic designs, this is a poster promoting paper boxes for cigarettes. There were influences coming in that we've already seen around the rest of the world. You can take a look at Aubrey Beardsley work from 1895 that no doubt influenced this theater poster from 1901. The theater of miniatures. And likewise, you can see the Art Nouveau style present here, along with an unmistakable nod to Japanese art forms and from a century before that. So they were moving, they were making progress due to the worldwide web of communication that was going on there, but it was still something drastic that needed to be done that would make the jump. And just to start out, we're going to talk about Cubo-futurism, which was a movement in which a bunch of Russian avant-garde artists basically absorbed the traits, the aesthetics of Cubism and Futurism, and they coined the term Cubo-futurism. And it involved experimenting with typography and design. And Kamensky here formed the group, and it was later joined by somebody we're about to talk about, Mayakovsky. And they were both poets, and part of this small group that would go around giving poetry readings around Russia. And so in the mid-19th, he became member of Mayakovsky's leftist front of the arts. But for now, let's go back to 1914. And here we have basically it's a birth of artists' books in Russia, in a sense that you see them using coarse paper, handcrafted production methods. They would make handmade editions, very much artist books. And part of it was just to express the poverty of the peasant society, in addition to the meager resources that artists and writers had at their disposal. So what they were doing here was this, in this case, with the poetry book, it was made in an edition of 300 from swatches of wallpaper that was stitched together with thread. The handcrafted, right? Very humble, yet extremely impressive. I've seen a couple of these at the Getty, and they are joy to not only behold, but to actually touch. These things are very small. The one that I had, which very similar to this, would nestle very cozily in the palm of my hand. And you'd have that texture, like garment fabric. It was exquisite. And so the texts were set in a variety of sizes and printed on the paste side of the wallpaper. And there were also drawings in there by a couple of other artists to support Kamensky's poems. And again, you can see the textures and patterns that they convey folk-like flavor, which is really still coming out of the roots of older traditional Russia, but yet so contemporary and also so charming. Okay, the title, Tango with Cows, okay? So you got to picture farm animals dancing the tango. And so what was this all about was a clash between what was primarily then in Russia a rural culture and the fact that urban life was growing. In other words, the Industrial Revolution in Russia, okay? And we don't have to go into this, different subsets of this kind of Cubo-futurist poetry ferroconcrete, where words would appear in compartments that were separated by these lines, or reinforcing rods, they would call them. And so that sets the stage for suprematism. And for suprematism, we are going to focus on its founder and leader, Kazimir Malevich. And what he was all about was the supremacy of color in painting, and painting in a style of basic forms and pure color. And he and the movement basically believed that the essence of the art experience had to do all about perception, the perceptual effect of color and form. And what they were doing was they were taking traditional art, which they considered art for art's sake, condescendingly. They were rejecting that. They were rejecting pictorial representation. They were also rejecting utilitarian function, in other words, graphic design. And so this was non-objective geometric abstraction that was meant to express pure feeling visually, right? And Malevich really believed that art needs to be non-objective and that it was useless to imitate nature in real life. And he wanted to completely abandon reality and instead come up with a new world, just shapes and forms that belonged exclusively to, should have backtracked. I think I said he was against art for art's sake. Au contraire, he was actually all about art for art's sake. The rejectors are coming up soon. Anyway, excuse me, this is a one-take talk. And so anyway, visual form became content, and the expressive qualities of the images were developed from intuition, and it was very spiritual. He argued that art needs to be a spiritual activity, again, apart from the utilitarian needs of society. And I am going to talk right now about two amazing papers that I got and images for the reading analysis assignment. And these are like A+ papers. And, here we have the first one. And let's see, Airplane Flying, Suprematist Composition by Kazimir Malevich, the leading Russian avant-garde visual artist. And so, as I was saying, he was very influenced by spirituality and various other notions. And he, in this case, had a profound interest in the airplane. And he was intertwining modern technology with this kind of weightless and horizonless world he created in suprematism. So this is like depicting, but it's, abstracting. So it's getting real. And this is one of the first suprematist artworks. So this is where he's starting with Airplane Flying, Suprematist Composition. And here he doesn't display a conventional airplane, obviously. But what he's trying to do is convey the sensation of the mechanical flights using 13 rectangles in black, yellow, red, and blue, okay? So primary colored rectangles were placed on white ground to further emphasize the relationship between them, using the colors as a way to show depth and varying distances as they increased or diminished in scale. And for example, you might say that you could take a look at the red, and maybe that's the propeller of the airplane. The yellow could be the wings, and the black would be the main body of the aircraft, and the blue, the tail rudder. And because art for art's sake is open to interpretation, you could also come along and say, well, this painting could also be the different stages in the movement of the airplane, kind of taking a cue from futurism there. And so it's an eye of the beholder sort of thing, and open to conversation. And we're starting here because the idea is to get more and more abstract anything. And so even though there are different interpretations of the artwork, the bottom line here is that the image is conveying the sensation of flight and also referencing the geometric qualities of the structure of the airplane. And here's where we get into deeper analysis. So far, the analysis has been really good. And so let's go back to the paper, which I've pretty much been taking my cues from. And so this composition is depicting an era that had a craze for transportation because the interest in airplanes was suddenly very urgent. I mean, because during the First World War, air power and planes were so important. They were a vital element of military strategy. Malevich was linking suprematism with airplanes using these images, one being the airplane flying, because he believed that planes provided different views of the real world and practical examples of abstracting from reality. And so, yeah, Malevich was linking suprematism with the latest technology. But the suprematist environment, the suprematist sensibility is far less about the actual object and more about a new view of reality that they can reveal here. So what Malevich wanted at this time was for the art to be as bold and daring as technology, and for artists to be willing to discard old ideas and points of view. This was his calling card for the other people that he recruited as suprematists, even though he was suprematist extreme. And yeah, he wanted them to embrace the new styles of art and, pursue those styles the way scientists who were connected with aviation would. Basically Malevich wanted art to be like the airplane, constantly developing and constantly exploring its own potential, okay? All that I got from a student's paper, and it is such a glorious example of how to do it. I hope you all were taking notes, especially A-paper aspirationals, because still plenty of time in the semester. And I'm going to give you another example, and that's going to be it for suprematism and constructivism, which was also darn good paper and certainly showing reading. There's no doubt about it that somebody was not only doing quantity, but most importantly doing quality, was doing analysis, was paying attention to contexts. All that stuff is being done in both of these papers. So let's take a look at the one on the right, the black cross on a white plane with a red oval behind it, okay? So, but if we go and reference black square, which we'll talk about more in a second, we can find meaning behind it within the actual context of the Russian Revolution. And the painting's titled Mystic Suprematism. And let's see, let me calm down for a second here, because basically this has a quality of calmness to it. I mean, it's like, it could be a resting place, a grave, and the blank white space that it's being set in surrounding the objects. It gives a sense of nothingness. So, we could in a way be talking about another take on that discussion we had about the Rene Magritte 4-panel painting. Anyway, so the red oval in the back of the piece represents the rise of communism, or as communists were known at the time within Russia, Reds. And so this red reflects the new world order that was rising in Russia by overthrowing the Tsar, and thus also overthrowing traditionalist values in their entirety, right? And as we move on, there's an irony in the sense that Malevich was initially very optimistic about the revolution and his movements. But what happened was that when the revolution came, it was going to create the same uprising that would basically crush Malevich's art form and all the ideas, because it was going to socialist realism by way of constructivism. So looking back, the painting could be portraying his black square, which was one of the starting points for suprematism, really a foundation, being engulfed in the red of communism. And for that matter, the black cross, which sought to represent human experience when confronted with nothingness, would then sink back into nothingness under the weight of communism. This is all Monday morning quarterbacking perspective, but that was what a student wrote, and it's all very legitimate, very smart, and very A plus plus once again. And just to wrap up here with autism. So here we are in December of 1915, and Malevich unveiled the Black Square, the iconic Black Square, what was called the last exhibition of futurist painting that was in St. Petersburg, which has since been renamed Petrograd. Okay, and so there you see Black Square placed high up on the wall across the corner of the room. And we can look at it today, and it's not going to mean anything in particular to us, but it was the same kind of treatment that Russian Orthodox religions gave to the saints icons. If you go into a traditional Russian home, if you see a picture in the corner hanging at the 45-degree angle, that is meant as worship. So, and they knew it back then when they were setting this up, because basically Malevich wanted to show the Black Square to be of special, not just special significance, but special spiritual significance, make it the star of the show and the overriding emblem of his new style. By that time, he had gotten beyond airplanes into this. Some have said it's the first time someone made a painting that wasn't of anything. And that's what he intended. Well, he didn't intend the Black Square to be a representation of a real thing. Like, with my propensity to look at things and make them other things, when I first saw it in person. And obviously there's nothing like seeing it in person, because it's not just a black square, it's actual paint. But you can look at it, and if you spend quality time with it, for me, I saw a window into the night, perhaps. And again, maybe we're back to that Magritte for a panel. But that's just me, right? And we actually had a sentence from another contributor, another paper, that put things this way. And so I'm quoting from another student. In a time of history that was dominated by war, destruction, and suffering, Malevich wanted to create something that offered hope of a new reality, one that can be achieved through simplicity and purity. And there we have suprematism.